My sister and husband betrayed me. Then court exposed everything. My name is Lisa Wynn, and if my life ever had a label stamped across it, it was this: responsible. Not golden, not favored, responsible. The kind of word that tastes dry on your tongue, the kind that sounds like praise but feels like a burden. And if there was a second label waiting just behind it, it was disappointment. I was the older daughter. That alone was enough to decide everything. Every test, every chore, every family rule somehow weighed twice as much on me as it did on my younger sister Lydia. She floated 3 years behind me like a princess wrapped in invisible silk. No matter what she did, my parents managed to find a halo over her head. If we both left dirty dishes in the sink, I got the lecture. If we both bombed a homework assignment, I was grounded. Lydia got a soft sigh and maybe a reminder to do better next time. The difference felt like living in 2 houses under one roof. Mine was all rules and punishments. Hers was gentle excuses. I'll never forget one night when the truth of it sank deep enough to scar. I was 16. Lydia was 13. We had snuck out to a party eyeliner crooked perfume stolen from Mom's dresser still clinging to our wrists. We stumbled back home at 1 a.m, stifling laughter until the porch light flicked on. Dad was waiting. He barely looked at Lydia. Go inside, he told her, his voice tired but not angry. She obeyed, head down, and that was it. Then he turned to me. His jaw tightened. His eyes didn't even look tired, they looked furious. I was grounded for a month. A month! Lydia got a whispered warning about making better choices. That was the night I realized I would always pay double. So I leaned into it. If I was destined to be the responsible one, then I would be the responsible one so good that no one could ever pretend not to see me. I studied until my eyes blurred. I stacked honors like bricks top of my class scholarships and part-time shifts at a bookstore to cover what scholarships didn't. My parents never called me brilliant. Not the way they excused Lydia's failures as creative spirit. But numbers and achievements spoke louder than their silence, and I planned to build a whole life out of them. And yet, in those years when I felt most invisible, I had one unlikely ally. Aunt Mildred. She was technically my father's aunt, already in her 70s, sharp-tongued, sharp-eyed, and living alone in a tidy little house 20 minutes from campus. She wasn't warm in the conventional sense. She didn't bake cookies or smother me with hugs, but she saw me. That was enough. Every Saturday, I'd drive over with groceries, stack her pantry shelves, listen to her mutter about the rising cost of milk. And every Saturday, just when I was about to leave, she'd touch my hand. You're the only one who bothers Lisa. Don't think I don't notice. Her words were like water to someone dying of thirst. One afternoon, after I'd fixed a leaky faucet for her, she looked at me over her glasses. You don't need to compete with your sister, she said quietly. You don't need to be compared. You're enough. I nearly cried right there in her kitchen. No one in my own house had ever said that. Meanwhile, Lydia spun in her own orbit. She dropped out of high school, patched over the failure with a GED, and bounced from boyfriends to odd jobs. My parents worried, but their worry came sugar-coated. She's just finding herself. She's freer than you. Always excuses, always softer landings. When Lydia turned 18, she disappeared with a guy named Rick. Leather jacket, motorcycle, vague job description that sounded shady the moment you heard it. My parents unraveled. Mom cried herself hoarse. Dad paced like a caged animal, calling every hospital within 2 states. I watched them crumble, watched them beg police and investigators for help. And then 3 months later, Lydia walked back through the front door like she'd just returned from a beach vacation. Rick was a jerk, she said, between mouthfuls of mashed potatoes at dinner. So I left. That was it. No apology, no accountability, just a shrug. My parents were so relieved they didn't care. Mom stroked Lydia's hair like she was the prodigal daughter. Dad kept refilling her glass. I sat there gripping my fork so hard the metal bent. My mother's hand had never smoothed my hair that way, not once, not even after I graduated with honors. I wanted to scream, to stand on the table and shout, "Do you even see me?" But I stayed quiet because I already knew the answer. That night, lying awake, I remembered Aunt Mildred's words, "Trust your instincts. They'll rarely steer you wrong." At the time, I didn't know how much I would need those words. Because if I had listened to them sooner, if I had trusted the knot in my stomach that always tightened around Lydia, maybe the future wouldn't have unfolded the way it did. Maybe betrayal wouldn't have arrived wrapped in a face so familiar, so practiced at pretending to change. But back then, all I knew was this: the world wasn't fair. And the only way I could survive it was by outworking everyone. And I believed naively that would be enough. I was in my final year of college when the phone call came. I was crammed in a library cubicle, highlighter hovering above a textbook I'd already stopped absorbing when my phone buzzed. The words that spilled through the line froze me in place. Aunt Mildred had passed away. For a moment, I just sat there, the buzz of fluorescent lights above me mixing with the pounding in my ears. She had been fine last weekend, complaining about the neighbor's dog sipping tea with her sharp little smile, and now she was gone quietly in her sleep. My throat locked. I hadn't realized until that moment how much of my strength came from knowing she was nearby, ready with a dry comment, ready to tell me I was enough. The funeral was small. My parents showed up, of course, but their grief felt distant, perfunctory. Mom dabbed at her eyes like it was a social requirement. Dad shook hands stiffly. I stood there clutching a tissue, knowing something essential had been cut out of me. The real shock came later in the lawyer's office. She'd updated her will a year earlier. Everything, her neat little house, her modest savings, her carefully kept investments was left to me. roughly $150,000. To a broke college senior, it felt unreal. I sat frozen in the chair as the lawyer read the words. My mother's first response wasn't grief. It was suspicion. She left it all to you. Her voice was thin, sharp around the edges. Yes, I whispered. She made the changes last year. Mom's silence stretched, then she sighed. Well, you were always her favorite. It wasn't admiration, it was accusation. When Lydia found out, her reaction was louder. That's so unfair, she snapped one night when I came home. You get a degree and a pile of money. What about me? The words slipped out before I could stop them. What about you, Lydia? You had the same chances? You didn't take them. Her face twisted with fury. You think you're better than me, don't you? Before I could answer, Dad cut in, his voice weary. Girls, that's enough. Lisa, don't be so harsh. Your sister's trying to figure things out. Figure things out. That was always the excuse. Lydia was still figuring things out, and I was supposed to have everything under control. I bit my tongue until I could taste blood. Later that night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at an old note Aunt Mildred had once left on her fridge. Don't let anyone else decide your future, Lisa. Trust yourself. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to squander this inheritance. I wasn't going to let it dissolve into family drama. I was going to build something with it. For months, I've been sketching business plans in the margins of my notebooks, consulting services for small businesses to streamline their operations. I had the framework, I had the ambition. Now, finally, I had the capital. When I told my parents, they looked horrified. That money could be a down payment on a house, Mom said, or a cushion for your future, Dad added. Starting a business is too risky. I met their eyes steady. I've done the research. I know what I'm doing. They exchanged that look, the one that combined pity and disapproval, the one they've been giving me my entire life whenever I dared to want something different. But this time, they couldn't stop me. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days. Meals eaten cold out of takeout containers. Clients who smiled politely and then disappeared. Nights I buried my face in my pillow, wondering if I just destroyed my future with a reckless gamble. But I kept going. Brick by brick, I built something. By the end of the first year, I had my first employee. By year 3, I had an office, a small team, and clients who trusted me. Meanwhile, Lydia floated. Job to job, boyfriend to boyfriend, always calling home with some new drama. Sometimes, she called me too, asking for money for help. And more often than I cared to admit, I gave in. My parents praised me for supporting your sister even though Lydia never repaid a cent. Still, for the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own. For once, the scales were tipping in my direction. And then Steven entered my life. He worked in IT for one of my client companies, tall, steady-eyed, with a quiet wit that caught me off guard. We circled each other in project meetings until one day, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I've been working up the courage for weeks, he admitted, cheeks pink. I laughed. And here I thought you were just really enthusiastic about network security. His smile was the kind that unclenched something in my chest. After so many years of being the responsible one, of being compared and diminished, it felt strange to be looked at, like I was enough just as I was. 2 years later, he proposed. I remember standing on a windy cliff by the coast, the sea churning below us, when he knelt with a ring. For the first time, I thought maybe the universe was finally balancing its scales in my favor. But I should have known better. Because the universe has a way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. The months leading up to the wedding passed in a blur. Flowers, invitations, seating charts, details I never cared about, but couldn't avoid. Steven was steady through it all, calming me when I spiraled into stress. We'll get through this, he'd say, his hand brushing mine across the kitchen table, envelopes spread between us like fallen leaves. One night, while we sat counting RSVP cards, I called my parents. I just need to confirm if Lydia's coming, I said, pen clenched between my teeth. The caterer was pressing me for numbers. The pause on the other end was too long. Finally, Mom sighed. Honey, Lydia won't make it. She's going through something with someone new. It's complicated, of course. Lydia's dramas always rewrote the family calendar. Still, I felt a pang of relief. The idea of her sweeping into my wedding, turning the day into her own stage, had been my secret dread. The day itself was perfect. The lake behind us shimmered gold, early autumn leaves swirling in the wind. Steven's hand trembled when he slid the ring on my finger, and when we kissed, the cheer that rose from our 50 guests felt like an embrace I had never known before. For once, I was the center of something good. Even my parents looked happy. Though Mom couldn't help herself, she leaned over at the reception and whispered, Lydia would have loved this cake. I smiled through clenched teeth. On our honeymoon in Maui, Steven and I walked barefoot on the beach at night, the surf curling around our ankles. He talked about buying a house someday, maybe starting a family. I let myself imagine it, a future I could believe in. But reality doesn't wait. We returned home, unpacking bags still lined with sand, when Steven leaned against the doorway, his voice careful. I've been thinking about making a change. What kind of change? I asked, folding clothes back into drawers. My company's restructuring. My role might get cut or shifted. But he hesitated, then continued, what if I came to work with you? You've mentioned needing someone to handle operations. That's what I do best. The idea startled me. Mixing marriage and business was a gamble. But Steven was competent and he had always believed in me. It could work, I said cautiously. As long as we set boundaries. No talking shop past 8. No bringing work fights home. He smiled. Deal. For a while, it worked beautifully. The company grew. Steven thrived as operations director. I finally felt like I wasn't carrying the weight alone. But peace never comes free. It was Mom who called late one evening. Her voice was tight, the kind she used when delivering bad news. Lisa, I need to talk to you about Lydia. My stomach clenched. What now? She's back home. That relationship she was in, it ended badly. She needs help. She needs stability. I pressed my palm against my temple. Mom, I can't. You can? She cut me off? You have a successful business. Surely there's something she could do there. Family helps family. Family. Always that word used like a weapon. That night, I vented to Steven expecting him to take my side. Instead, he surprised me. Maybe you should give her a chance, he said gently. People change. You don't know Lydia like I do. Maybe not. But what if this time is different? His words unsettled me. If even Steven believed Lydia deserved another chance, maybe I was the unreasonable one. So against every instinct in me, I agreed to meet her. When she walked into my office, I barely recognized her. Gone were the messy ponytails, the smudged eyeliner, the wrinkled shirts. She wore a fitted blazer. Her hair was neat, her makeup understated. She smiled with a politeness that felt almost rehearsed. Thank you for seeing me, she said softly. I know you have every reason to doubt me, but I want a fresh start. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a certificate from a business administration program. I stared at it. Lydia, who had never managed to hold a job longer than 3 months, had completed a year-long course. My instincts screamed caution, but Mom's pleading voice echoed in my ears. Aunt Mildred would have wanted you to help. Finally, I nodded. 3-month probation, that's all? Her face lit up. Thank you, Lisa. I won't let you down. I placed her under Steven's department. It felt safer that way. He would see through any laziness and he could report honestly. At first, she surprised me. She showed up early, she stayed late, she charmed clients. More than once, Steven came home saying, she's actually good with people. Clients like her. I forced a smile, but a knot twisted in my stomach. This wasn't the Lydia I knew. And maybe that was the problem. Weeks turned into months, and Lydia kept surprising everyone but me. Employees chatted with her in the break room, praising her energy. Clients mentioned her name in thank you emails. Steven praised her efficiency almost nightly. Each compliment landed on me like a stone. I told myself I should feel proud after all. Hadn't I given her this chance? Instead, I felt something colder. As if the walls of my own company were shifting, folding me out of the picture. The unease grew heavier with time. At a staff gathering one Friday evening, I stood by the coffee table watching Lydia and Steven laugh at some private joke. Their faces were turned toward each other, too close, too familiar. My chest tightened. I tried to shake it off. Don't be paranoid, I whispered to myself. But when I stepped into their circle, Lydia's smile faltered, just for a second, like a curtain slipping before being yanked back into place. The tiny crack rattled me more than I wanted to admit. The first person who confirmed my fear wasn't Lydia. It wasn't Steven. It was Frank. Frank had been with me since the early days, a retired police officer who'd taken a chance on my fledgling company. He was security chief, now dependable blunt with a dry sense of humor. He called everyone kiddo, even people twice my age. He had never once looked at me with pity. Until recently. Lately, he avoided my eyes in meetings. Conversations died when I walked into a room. Once, I caught him looking at me as if I were a patient he didn't know how to break the bad news to. One evening, after everyone else had left, I asked him to stay behind. Frank, I said, leaning against my desk, something's wrong. I can feel it. Tell me, he shifted uncomfortably. Miss Wynn, maybe it's better if you don't. No. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I can't keep living with this feeling, Frank. If you know something, you tell me. Right now. He sighed, then reached into his bag and pulled out a tablet. You need to see this. The screen lit up with grainy footage from one of our office cameras. At first, I saw only Steven and Lydia walking side by side, laughing. Nothing unusual. But then, his hand brushed hers. She tilted her face up, and suddenly, they were kissing pressed against the wall before disappearing into the storage room. The blood drained from my body. My ears rang. Frank swiped to another clip. Different day, different hallway. Same betrayal. How long? My voice cracked. 3 months at least, he said quietly. His eyes were heavy with sorrow. I'm sorry, kiddo. The tablet felt like it burned in my hands. Images seared into me, Steven's hand on Lydia's back, Lydia leaning into him like she belonged there. My throat tightened so much I could barely breathe. I forced myself to hand the tablet back. Thank you for showing me. Frank nodded, his face etched with sympathy. Whatever you decide to do, you won't face it alone. But when I left the office that night, I felt more alone than I ever had. I drove home in a daze, my fingers gripping the wheel so hard, the skin on my knuckles turned white. Every red light, every turn of the road, I replayed those videos again and again, as if by sheer force, I could make them mean something else. When I walked into the house, Steven was humming softly in the kitchen, stirring pasta sauce like it was any other night. The normalcy made bile rise in my throat. Hey, he said, with a smile. You're home early? I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the video Frank had given me, and pressed play. The sound of laughter filled the kitchen. Steven froze, the spoon slipping from his hand and clattering onto the counter. His face drained of color. Lisa, I can explain. Explain what? My voice shook, but it was sharp as glass. How you've been sleeping with my sister in my company's hallways? He reached out. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I stepped back. Don't you dare touch me. For a moment, he just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Then he whispered, please, it's not what you think. The rage in me boiled over. I screamed so loudly, my throat burned. Pack your things and get out. You're done here. Both of you. Fired. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Final, irreversible. Stephen's lips parted again, but this time no sound came. He knew. He knew there was nothing left to say. That night, I sat at my desk long after midnight, drafting termination papers for both of them. My hand shook as I signed Stephen's name on the line that ended his career in my company, and Lydia's on the line that should have ended her place in my life. But something in my chest told me this was only the beginning. The next morning, my phone buzzed until it nearly shook off the nightstand. Mom. Over and over. I ignored it at first, but by the 10th call, I picked up. Lisa, she blurted, her voice shrill. What is going on? Stephen's at our house. Lydia won't stop crying. You need to come fix this. The audacity almost made me laugh. Fix this, as if I had created the mess. Did you know? I asked quietly. Her silence stretched long enough to answer for her. By evening, I found myself pulling into my parents' driveway, my hands clammy on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive away, never look back. But another part, the part still craving answers, forced me through their front door. They were all there. Mom, Dad, Lydia, and Stephen. My husband and my sister sat side by side on the couch, eyes red, hands entwined like a united front. My parents flanked them like bodyguards. It felt less like a homecoming and more like walking into an ambush. Without a word, I connected my phone to their television and pressed play on the video. The room filled with the grainy sound of laughter, the image of Stephen and Lydia kissing against the office wall. Mom gasped theatrically. Dad stared at the floor. Lydia covered her face with her hands and sobbed. How could you all betray me like this? My voice cracked. For a moment, guilt seemed to weigh down the room. But then Mom straightened her expression, hardening into something I recognized: justification. Lisa, she said, her voice smooth but sharp. Nobody meant to hurt you. These things happen. People fall in love unexpectedly. I stared at her, my chest hollow. People fall in love. That was her defense. Lydia peeked at me through tear-streaked fingers, her voice trembling. We didn't want it to happen, but we couldn't stop it. Stephen and I, we're in love. Stephen squeezed her hand. The world tilted. My sister and my husband sitting in my parents' living room, declaring their love like a couple of star-crossed teenagers. I could barely breathe when Lydia whispered the next words. I'm pregnant. The air left my lungs. My knees threatened to give out. What? Almost 4 weeks, she murmured, pressing a delicate hand to her stomach. We were going to tell you next week. I staggered back as if she'd physically struck me. The betrayal was now alive, growing inside her, binding them together in a way no court, no contract could untangle. That doesn't excuse what you did, I managed to say, clinging to whatever scraps of control I had left. Stephen's face hardened, his voice suddenly cold. You can't fire us without cause. That's illegal. We'll sue you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Sexual misconduct in the workplace isn't cause. Dad finally looked up, his voice sharp with judgment. You're overreacting, Lisa. Nobody should lose their livelihood over this. You've got to be kidding me, I whispered. Lydia sniffled, her tears drying into calculation. I am under enormous stress because of you. My doctor says the baby could be at risk. I have medical documentation. My stomach twisted. Medical documentation. You planned this. Her chin lifted, eyes shining with defiance. We're getting married as soon as your divorce is finalized, and you'll pay for everything you've done to us. Firing a pregnant woman. The courts will destroy you. Mom nodded furiously. She needs stability, Lisa. You need to reinstate them both immediately. Or what I asked, though, I already knew. Or we'll file a lawsuit tomorrow, Stephen said flatly. Wrongful termination, emotional distress, endangerment of an unborn child. How do you think your clients will react to those headlines? Dad sighed dramatically. We don't want it to come to that, but you've left us no choice. I looked at them, my mother, who once told me to protect my little sister. My father, who lectured me about loyalty and duty. My husband, who vowed to be faithful. My sister, who had stolen everything I built. And I realized in that suffocating living room that I was standing alone. No one here would choose me. Not over Lydia. Not ever. Without another word, I turned and walked out. The night air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing. My chest ached. My hands trembled, but my spine stayed straight. Behind me, their voices rose, calling my name, demanding I come back. I didn't. As I slid into my car and started the engine, one thought repeated in my head like a drumbeat. They think they've cornered me. They think they've won, but they don't know me at all. The morning after, I walked out of my parents' house. I made a call that would change everything. James Patterson. His name had floated through business circles for years. A divorce lawyer with a reputation for being ruthless, precise, and impossible to intimidate. Some called him a shark. Others called him salvation. When I explained my situation, he didn't gasp or comfort me. He just listened silent, except for the scratch of his pen on paper. Then when I finally stopped talking, he asked one question that cut through everything. Lisa, are you sure the betrayal is only happening in your personal life? Because people who cross boundaries, they're often cross them elsewhere. Have you checked your company's finances? My heart lurched. The answer was no, I hadn't. Within days, James assembled a team of auditors. They moved through my accounts like surgeons, dissecting every line item Stephen had ever touched. I watched from the corner of my office, my stomach twisting tighter with each passing hour. The results were worse than I imagined. Forged invoices, phantom consulting fees, vendor payments that led straight to Lydia's personal account, and worse, to my parents. Stephen had been siphoning money for months, slipping funds out of the company like water through cracked pipes. Lydia padded expense reports with luxury clothes, spa treatments, vacations, labeled as business trips. My parents collected payments as consultants, though they hadn't lifted a finger for my business. They weren't just accomplices. They were all in on it. When James laid the papers in front of me, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold them. "This isn't just infidelity," he said calmly. "This is fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. We'll fight their lawsuit with evidence of crimes far more serious." I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. Stephen and Lydia struck first. Within a week, they filed lawsuits, wrongful termination, emotional distress, discrimination against a pregnant woman. Stephen demanded alimony, claiming he had been instrumental in my company's growth. Lydia paraded her pregnancy as both shield and weapon. And my parents, they filed affidavits supporting them, swearing I had always been jealous that I had targeted Lydia out of spite. The betrayal was now official, stamped, notarized, filed with the court. The first day in court felt like walking into an execution chamber. Lydia arrived pale, one hand resting delicately on her belly, her face framed in practiced fragility. Stephen walked beside her, jaw tight, eyes cold. My parents trailed behind, their postures stiff with manufactured righteousness. Together, they looked like a family, and I, the one betrayed, looked like the outsider. During cross-examination, Lydia's attorney leaned in with a sneer. "Ms. Wynn, isn't it true you fired your sister out of jealousy? That you've always resented her success?" "Success," I repeated, my voice sharp. "I fired her for inappropriate conduct in the workplace and financial misconduct we have documented extensively." Lydia burst into tears on cue. "She's trying to make me lose my baby. The stress she's causing it could endanger the pregnancy." The judge called for order, but the theatrics worked. I could see the jury shifting uneasily, their eyes darting between us. But James was patient. He moved like a predator, not rushing, not revealing his full hand too soon. One by one, he laid down evidence like cards in a deadly game. Bank statements, emails, security footage authenticated by experts. Expense reports filled with luxury purchases that had nothing to do with business. And then the dagger. Lydia's business certificate, the one she had proudly handed me in my office to prove her fresh start. James's team proved it was a forgery. The courtroom buzzed. Lydia's sobs faltered. But James wasn't finished. His private investigators dug into Lydia's past. They uncovered 3 men in another state who had filed police reports against her for credit card fraud only to mysteriously withdraw the complaints. Investigators revealed that my parents had quietly paid those men off, shielding Lydia from consequences just as they always had. "This isn't an isolated mistake," James said, his voice steady but cutting. "This is a pattern of calculated deceit, supported and enabled by the plaintiffs." For the first time, I saw cracks in Stephen's armor. His jaw clenched, his eyes flickered, avoiding mine. Lydia clutched her stomach and whispered furiously to her lawyer. My parents looked smaller than I had ever seen them. The trial stretched for months. Every day, I walked into that courtroom felt like peeling back another layer of betrayal. Each piece of evidence confirmed what my gut had always known. My family had never been on my side. And yet, facing them across the courtroom, I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt sharpened, hardened. Because now, I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting to survive. The trial became my life. Weeks blurred into months, each one draining me further than the last. Every morning, I put on the same armor, a black suit, a calm face, and the resolve to walk into a courtroom filled with people who wanted to destroy me. And every morning, I faced them. Stephen, once my husband, now my adversary, sat with his jaw locked, his eyes cold as glass. Lydia leaned against him, her belly rounding with the pregnancy she wielded like a weapon. My parents flanked them faithfully, their expressions carved in stone. Together, they looked united, against me. Reporters gathered outside each day, shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning. "Is it true you fired your sister because you were jealous?" "How do you respond to the discrimination claims?" Their voices cut their words, branding me before the verdict was even considered. Inside the courtroom, it was no better. Lydia's lawyer spun stories dripping with pity. A young woman pregnant and fragile, betrayed by her own sister, cast aside without mercy. Then Stephen's attorney would take over, painting him as the backbone of my company, the man who built it beside me, only to be discarded when I no longer needed him. Each time, I clenched my fists under the table. I wanted to shout to remind them of the forged invoices, the siphoned funds, the lies. But James would touch my arm, a silent reminder, patience. Because he knew that the truth didn't just need to be told. It needed to be proven. So he proved it. One by one, James presented the evidence we had gathered. Security footage, emails, bank transfers. Each piece was like a crack forming in their carefully constructed performance. Still, it was grueling. Lydia cried on cue, her hand always protectively on her stomach. Stephen testified with a voice so steady it almost convinced me he believed his own lies. My parents told the court under oath that I had always been jealous of Lydia, that I had targeted her out of spite. Hearing their words gutted me more than any legal argument could. At night, I would collapse into my bed, exhausted, but unable to sleep. I replayed every question, every look, every betrayal. My company wavered under the scrutiny. Headlines questioned my leadership. Clients whispered about the scandal. Employees looked at me with sympathy one day, doubt the next. The emotional toll was relentless. There were mornings I stared at the mirror and barely recognized myself. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes ringed with dark circles. I whispered to my reflection, "Don't break. Not yet. Not here." And then came the day Lydia took the stand. She walked slowly, her hand cradling her belly like a crown jewel, her eyes wide and shimmering with rehearsed innocence. Her lawyer guided her with gentle questions. "Lydia, can you tell us what it felt like to be betrayed by your sister?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. It felt like my own blood turned against me. I begged her to let me work to prove myself. Instead, she humiliated me. She wanted me gone because she couldn't stand to share success. Her words echoed through the room, and I felt every eye on me. But James stood calm as ever. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. "Miss Wynn," he began softly, "how many jobs had you held before your sister hired you?" Her tears faltered. "A few." "Would you like the court to believe that a few means stable employment?" He held up a folder. "Because our records show you held 12 jobs in 3 years. None lasted longer than 4 months. The courtroom stirred. Lydia shifted uncomfortably. James pressed on. "And these invoices, can you confirm that these were legitimate business expenses?" She glanced at the papers, her face pale. I don't remember." "Would it refresh your memory if I told you these business trips were to luxury resorts and that the payments were charged directly to your sister's company credit card?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Each question stripped away the mask she'd worn so carefully. By the time he was done, Lydia looked smaller, her fragility crumbling under the weight of documented truth. But still, the war wasn't over. Stephen had yet to testify. My parents clung to their lies. The jury remained unreadable. Every day was another round in a battle that felt endless. Every night I lay awake wondering if justice could survive theatrics, if the truth was enough against the family's performance of unity. Yet through it all, one thought carried me: I wasn't just fighting for money or for reputation. I was fighting for myself, for the woman Aunt Mildred once told me I was enough to be. And I refused to let them take that away. The day Stephen took the stand, the air in the courtroom shifted. He walked with his old confidence, the same steady stride I once mistook for strength. His suit was pressed, his tie perfectly knotted. To the jury, he looked like a man wronged, ready to reclaim dignity. His lawyer wasted no time. "Mr. Wynn, can you describe your role in the company your wife built?" Stephen leaned into the microphone, his voice firm. "I wasn't just her husband. I was her partner. I handled operations logistics, the details that kept the company afloat. Without me, it would have collapsed." I felt my nails dig into my palms. "Partner." The word twisted like a knife. "And how did your wife repay you for your contributions?" the lawyer asked. Stephen's jaw clenched. "She threw me out. She destroyed my career. And when I found comfort in someone who actually valued me, she tried to ruin that too." His eyes flicked toward Lydia, then to the jury as if begging them to see him as noble. The performance was flawless. Almost. Because James had been waiting. When cross-examination began, the room stilled. James walked slowly towards Stephen, holding a folder thick with documents. He spoke softly, but every word carried weight. "Mr. Wynn, you testified that you were instrumental to this company's success. Is that correct?" "Yes," Stephen said firmly. "Then can you explain why these forged invoices tied directly to your signature list payments to vendors that don't exist?" Stephen blinked. I don't recall." James laid a stack of evidence on the stand. "Let me refresh your memory. These payments were traced to personal accounts belonging to your sister-in-law and even your in-laws. Do you deny authorizing them?" Stephen's composure faltered. "I didn't know." "You didn't know?" James repeated, his voice sharpening. "As operations director, you didn't know hundreds of thousands of dollars were bleeding out of the company you claimed to have kept afloat. You expect this court to believe that the jury shifted." Stephen's lawyer objected. Overruled. James pressed on. "And these emails, shall I read them aloud, in which you instruct Lydia to label personal vacations as business trips, to disguise her expenses through company accounts?" Stephen's face reddened. He swallowed hard. "It wasn't like that." "What was it like then?" James asked, his voice calm but merciless. "Because to everyone else, it looks like embezzlement." Silence stretched. For the first time, Stephen looked small. Not the confident man I once loved, but a cornered thief. The jury saw it too. I could see it in their eyes. When James returned to our table, he whispered, "That was the breaking point." Still, the war dragged on. Lydia's sobs returned, her hand on her stomach, whispering about stress and risk. My parents testified again, insisting they knew nothing about the finances, portraying themselves as victims caught in the middle. But the cracks were widening. Every day their story unraveled further under James's quiet precision. The weeks blurred into exhaustion. My body ached. My mind felt stretched thin, but I refused to collapse. I showed up every day, spine straight, eyes forward. And then finally, the trial drew to a close. Closing arguments filled the room with tension so heavy, it felt like fog. Lydia's lawyer pleaded with the jury to consider compassion to see a pregnant woman cast aside by her heartless sister. Stephen's lawyer painted me as vindictive, ruthless, unfit to lead. Then James stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This case is not about jealousy," he said. "It is not about compassion or appearances. It is about facts, and the facts are simple. Funds were stolen, documents were forged, trust was shattered. My client built her company through years of sacrifice. And the very people who should have stood by her, the people she trusted most, conspired to take it all away." He paused, letting silence stretch. "Ask yourselves," he said softly, "what would you do if your spouse, your sister, and your parents joined together to betray you?" Would you roll over and let them strip away everything you've built? Or would you stand as my client has and fight for truth? The courtroom was silent when he returned to his seat. The judge dismissed us for deliberation. The jury filed out, leaving the rest of us in a tense, suffocating limbo. Lydia clutched Stephen's hand, whispering frantically. My parents avoided my eyes, their faces pale. And me, I sat perfectly still, my pulse racing so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Because everything, my company, my future, my very name now balanced on 12 strangers behind a closed door. The jury deliberated for hours. Each tick of the courtroom clock felt like a hammer striking my chest. I sat motionless, hands folded tightly in my lap, pretending calm. But inside my thoughts spiraled. What if pity won out? What if Lydia's tears and Stephen's practiced speeches swayed them? What if betrayal triumphed over truth? At last, the bailiff returned. All rise. The jury filed back in their expressions unreadable masks. My stomach clenched so tightly I thought I might collapse. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with steady eyes, held the paper that would decide my fate. On the charge of wrongful termination, she began, her voice firm. We find in favor of the defendant, Miss Lisa Wynn. A rush of air left my lungs, but I barely had time to register before she continued. On the charge of discrimination against a pregnant employee, we find in favor of the defendant, Ms. Lisa Wynn. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her belly. A few sympathetic heads in the gallery turned, but the foreperson pressed on unwavering. On the matter of financial misconduct, we recognize the evidence of embezzlement and fraud. We recommend full restitution and further criminal proceedings against Stephen Wynn and Lydia Wynn. The room erupted in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel, her voice cutting through the noise. Order. She glanced down at her papers. This court accepts the jury's findings. Mr. Stephen Wynn, you are hereby found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. Sentencing will follow 3 years in prison with restitution payments to Ms. Lisa Wynn's company. Stephen's face drained of all color. He looked less like the man who once stood at an altar with me and more like a boy caught stealing from a cookie jar. Except the jar was my life's work. Miss Lydia Wynn, the judge continued, given your pregnancy, the court will suspend a prison sentence and place you on probation. However, you will be required to complete restitution and community service. Any violation will result in immediate incarceration. Lydia's sobs echoed through the room, but they no longer carried the same weight. They sounded hollow, stripped of performance. And finally, the judge said, her voice sharp as glass, to the plaintiffs who attempted to manipulate this court with false claims, let this serve as a warning. The justice system is not a stage for your deceit. She slammed the gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. For a moment, the world was still. Then it fractured. Lydia collapsed into my mother's arms, crying that she didn't deserve this. Stephen's lawyer muttered furiously at him, already backing away from the sinking ship of his client. My father's face was granite, his eyes burning into me with something that looked less like anger and more like shame. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. I walked through them like a shadow, James beside me, his hand firm on my shoulder. You won, he said quietly as we stepped into the chill outside air. Did I? That night, I sat in my new condo, staring out of the window at the city lights. Victory felt heavy. I had my company, my freedom, my name. But the cost was steep. My family, the same people I once would have sacrificed anything for, were now strangers bound together not by love, but by betrayal. In the weeks that followed, the ripples spread. Stephen was processed through the county jail, his mugshot plastered across local news. The man who once wore expensive suits now wore an orange jumpsuit. Lydia moved back in with my parents, her probation a shadow over every step. They whispered about suing again, about appeals, about unfair rulings. But none of it mattered. Their finances were gutted by legal fees, their reputation shredded. I blocked their calls. At the office, my employees looked at me with something I hadn't felt in months: respect. I stood before them in a town hall meeting, laying out everything. The betrayal, the fraud, the verdict. Transparency. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. When I finished, the room was silent. Then Frank, the head of security, started clapping. One by one, the others joined in. That sound, the echo of hands colliding in rhythm, felt like balm on an open wound. Still nights were harder. Sometimes I woke gasping Stephen's voice replaying in my head. Sometimes I saw Lydia's tears, heard my mother's excuses, felt my father's silence. Guilt and anger wrestled in my chest, leaving no room for peace. One evening, James called. Lisa, he said, his tone softer than I'd ever heard. You did everything right, but remember, winning in court isn't the same as healing. Don't confuse the two. His words stuck, because he was right. I hadn't healed. I'd only survived. And survival, I realized, was just the beginning. The weeks after the trial felt like walking across a bridge, made of glass, fragile, shimmering, dangerous. Every step forward reminded me how much could still shatter beneath me. I threw myself into work not out of ambition, but out of necessity. My company had taken blows, its reputation bruised by headlines and whispers. I faced rooms of clients who asked careful questions, weighing whether to trust me again. I answered everyone, not with spin or false promises, but with truth. Yes, I said, my husband stole from me. My sister betrayed me. My parents sided against me. But my company stands because integrity still matters, and I will prove it to you. Slowly, painfully, trust returned. Projects resumed. Clients renewed. Employees rallied. The heartbeat of the business grew steadier, and with it mine. But home was different. The silence in my condo pressed in like a second skin. Some nights, I'd curl up on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up here. Married, betrayed, divorced, sisterless, parentless, at least in practice. Was this what survival looked like? One evening, Frank stopped by unannounced. He handed me a takeout bag, noodles, and spring rolls, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. You know, he said, chewing thoughtfully, you didn't lose a family. You cut out a tumor. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, but it does mean you'll live. I laughed weakly. That's one way to put it. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. Lisa, you're stronger than you think. Don't let them define you even now. After he left, I sat in the quiet, his words circling my thoughts. Stronger than I think. Maybe, but strength was lonely. Months slipped by. Lydia gave birth to a boy. I heard through acquaintances that she and Stephen had married in a prison visitation room, her veil a thin piece of lace against fluorescent lights. My parents attended proud, as though nothing about the situation was twisted. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they rallied around a convicted fraud and a sister on probation, I was the one they painted as cruel, heartless, unforgiving. For a time, the bitterness nearly swallowed me. I wanted to scream at the world that I wasn't the villain. But then I realized, why should I scream for people who never listened? So I stopped. I stopped checking for updates, stopped asking acquaintances for news, stopped caring whether they thought of me at all. And slowly the silence shifted. It became less of a cage and more of a clearing. I filled it with new routines, early morning walks, cooking meals just for me, savoring flavors instead of rushing, joining a trauma support group where strangers sat in circles and spoke truths raw enough to sting. I was betrayed by my husband and my family, I told them one night. My voice cracked, but no one flinched. They just nodded, some with tears, some with the quiet understanding of people who knew the weight of loss. In that room, I wasn't the woman on the front page or the defendant in a lawsuit. I was just Lisa, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Healing didn't come in a wave. It came in moments. The first time I laughed without bitterness. The first time I signed a new client contract and felt pride instead of exhaustion. The first time I slept through the night without jolting awake from Stephen's voice echoing in my dreams. One afternoon, I found an old photograph of Aunt Mildred tucked in a drawer. She was laughing, her arm looped through mine, eyes bright even in age. On the back, in her spidery handwriting, she had written, "Trust yourself, always." I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered, "I'm trying." Because I was. Still, some nights I wondered about the future. Would I ever trust again? Would I ever let someone close enough to risk this kind of pain? I didn't know. Maybe I never would. But maybe that was okay, because what I had now was mine, hard-won, unshakable. I looked out my window at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like 1,000 small promises. Life stretched ahead, uncertain and uncharted. For once, I didn't need every answer. I only needed this truth I had survived. And sometimes survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. So ask yourself, if the people you trusted most tore your world apart, would you cling to them anyway? Or would you do what I did? Would you choose to stand alone stronger, but forever changed? Thanks for watching. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help us bring more powerful, true-to-life stories of resilience and redemption. Stay strong and trust your instincts.